Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for Issues and Answers, the graduation rate. I'm Fred Martino. It's one of the biggest challenges in New Mexico, our low graduation rate. Just 68.5% in 2014, far below the national average, which hit a record high of 81% in 2013. But it's important to note, New Mexico has one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and that does make a difference. Take a look at these numbers from America's Promise Alliance, a group working to increase graduation rates. It says about 73% of low-income American students graduate from high school, but more than 88% of non-low-income students get their diploma, a very big gap. With us to talk about this issue, a longtime educator and state senator, Dr. Bill Soles, the dean of the College of Education at New Mexico State University, Dr. Donald Pope Davis, and also head administrator at Dolores Huerta Charter School, Octavio Casillas. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. Throughout our program, we are going to have a lot of videos as well from our American Graduate Project. You've probably been seeing those videos on KRWG TV over the last year, and we'll be bringing you those as the program continues. Senator Soles, I want to begin with you as someone who taught for many years, served as an administrator as well in local public schools. Give us a sense of the key challenges as you see them for New Mexico in trying to increase our graduation rate, as I mentioned, far below the national average.
And I think you hit it very much in your opening, in that New Mexico has very, very high poverty rates. And if we look at the students that are not graduating with their peers, they tend to be disproportionately students who have come from poverty, have come from bilingual cultures where their culture has not been supported. They're bilingual students, many of those kinds of things, and they come with a lot of other kinds of challenges that more affluent students don't have. And I think that contributes lots to that. I think over the years we very much have tried to deal with the high school graduation rate or the dropouts once they get to high school, and I think we need more systemic things that really start with dealing with poverty in our community and also with education starting prenatally so that they are prepared and set up to do well once they get to high school.
Okay. Dean, universities, of course, are preparing teachers to go into this very challenging environment. Give us a sense of how you do that. It's, I know, a very difficult job.
Yes, I mean, I think you've also hit it on the head that in this environment, preparing teachers to go into school environments and engage the population that they work with, particularly today, is very challenging, particularly here in New Mexico. And the challenge is that as we think about the role that modernity might play in this process, is that we are still in some of our schools using what I would call traditional methods and approaches to educating and engaging people. And so we need to begin to think about a holistic way of engaging people in this process. And holistic, what I mean by that is that it is a way in which we're not only having our students simply sit in a classroom and listen to a teacher opine about a particular theory or orientation, but how do we actively engage them in these kinds of events so that they also feel like they are active learners in this process. And so as teachers begin to acquire the skills to become teachers, we simultaneously must not only look at new and different ways to do that, but we also have to spend some time in helping our teachers become what I would call culturally competent, because each community is different. And so there's a need to be responsive to that particular community so that the methodology, whether it be pedagogically or content driven, are aligned with the values of that particular community, but it has to be an active part of that. If I might digress one little bit, it is the part about the traditional approach of learning that perhaps many of us sitting here have been part of or been exposed to. The model today is one where students want to be active, not only intellectually but physically as well. And so we need to think of ways in which that engagement is much more holistic. It engages the mind and the body, and it allows students to have what I would call in vivo experiences so that they can become active participants in their own educational encounters.
Okay. Head Administrator Casillas, tell us about the key issues that you are dealing with as you try to increase the graduation rate in your school. I know there are resource challenges, state mandates. We've all heard and we've seen on this program and on newsmakers on KRWG-TV with controversies over a lot of standardized testing. So there's a whole host of things. Give us a sense of what you're dealing with.
Standardized assessments have become, actually, in my opinion, have become a problem for the state. We are trying to gauge everything that the students are learning, and we're testing so much that we're losing track of what should be doing in the classroom, and it should be engaging students. And it should be engaging students not only so that they can perform well in assessments, but so that they can perform well in their everyday life. In middle school, for example, which is, I'm a principal of a middle school. In middle school, we don't have many programs for the kids. We have a lot of programs in elementary, and we have a lot of programs in the high schools. But in middle school, there seems to be a disconnect with support systems and resources for students. And those are some of the most difficult times for students. That's when we develop identity. That's where we start really considering, what do I want to do when I grow up? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be an engineer? And I can tell you, none of our kids decide, I want to be a high school dropout kid. None of them. They all have dreams. They all have vision. And they all want to do something in life. But there's something happens in middle school where we lose resources, we lose support, and then we start losing students. So by the time they get into high school seems to be playing a catch-up game with our kids. And that is a big problem for high schools, and I believe it's unfair for the high schools in a way, but it starts happening in the middle school that we start losing kids. Kids don't drop out in high school, they start dropping out. Actually, we have the statistics that kids who miss school more than 10, 15 times a year, and who start losing progress, if they lose 1 year of academic progress by the time they get into middle school, then they start being absent more. And then at that point, they start even lacking more academic progress. So then they get into high school 2 or 3 years behind. They are used to missing school. They don't feel like there's enough support for them to catch up. And then that's when we lose the students. So I believe we need to help kids like we do we need more programs in elementary, definitely. We need to do away with a lot of the assessments that we do. We need to provide a lot of support in middle school so that when they get into the high schools take the kids and kind of gear them to the career that they're interested in so that they can excel in high school and get into the university and actually be at the university at reading and writing and math level so that they can perform in all of their courses.
Several years ago, I was a middle school principal. And I loved it. I mean, those kids were wonderful. They were really interesting, and sometimes I think they want to be treated like children, and sometimes they want to be treated like adults. And as long as you switch as fast as they do, you have a great time with middle school kids. But you brought up something that I recall very clearly is when I first got in there, we had a number of students who would fail, and then they'd be required to go to summer school, and they'd be given more of what they failed at. And that just seemed it just seemed wrong to me. And so I put in my second year there, summer school was no longer academics. Summer school was about learning how to be a student. How do you take notes? Why do you go to class? How do you ask questions? How do you do all of those things? And we actually had the number of students who failed classes the next year of that same group was about half what it had normally been. We didn't save them all, but certainly there were some students who felt like they now had the skills in order to be successful, where every year before they'd always fallen behind, they always went to summer school and they got more of what they failed at.
Yeah, a big issue.
If I may also, I concur with both points that my colleagues are making here. The other part about middle school, which is extremely important, and you alluded to this, is that during the middle years, This is the time when students starting to become adults, and they begin to think about their own identity. They're beginning to think about the values. They begin to, the most important group we know from some data is that their peer group becomes more important to them in some ways than their family and so forth. And so part of the intervention is for us to begin to take a look at what are some of the important soft skills, what we call, what we call them, where students begin to learn how to behave, how to act.
Make those choices
Exactly, and make good choices. The other part of that is we need to continue to be responsive to the fact that students at this age, it's a very delicate developmental period in their lives.
Very delicate.
And so part of what we need to do is become the models that are so important to students in their lives at this particular period of time. And I think, I agree with you, we need to begin to think of how do we improve and intervene with students at those points in time. And one last point is we also need to begin to think more holistically about involving parents in that discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
And, Dean Pope Davis brings up a very important point about identity, and I'm glad you bring it up because it's not only identity as to are you going to be a rock star when you grow up, are you going to be an engineer? I think students in middle school, I believe, develop also the identity of, or that recognition, am I going to be an important member and contribute to society? And if they don't feel that they're being valued and that they're going to contribute positively, they themselves withdraw themselves and they don't want to be seen anymore. They become invisible. They make themselves invisible, and if we allow them to continue to make themselves invisible, when they get into the high school, then they can't perform, and they're so used to making themselves invisible that's when they fall through the cracks. So the point you bring about identity, I think it's very, very important, but not only as to what am I going to do with my life is who doesn't want to be a positive member in the community? Who doesn't want to walk down the street and be recognized for the good things that we do for our contribution? And I believe in middle school, kids lose that recognition. And Senator Solz, you also bring up a very important point that, these kids, they come to school in 6th grade and they're still mama's and dad's little boy and grandma's little boy. And then they get into 7th grade and they come back with this coarse voice, and now we're expecting them to become men, and then they grow up and young ladies, and they grow up so quick, and we start treating them like adults now, but there's really there wasn't enough time for them to transfer from one thought to the other. Mm-hmm. So that's why middle school is such an important age, is because kids develop so many identities through that period, and if we don't support them during that time, then when they get into the high school, they're lost. And I think it's unfair for kids and for high schools to get to that point when we can prevent it.
I'm a psychologist by background, and I'm acutely aware of the developmental issues that happen with kids during this period. And there's often a disconnect when somebody looks at the optics and they see this 5-foot or 6-foot person who's got a deeper voice, developing certain physical attributes, and there's an automatic assumption that they are now an adult.
Yes.
We forget that at that particular age, they're still growing intellectually, cognitively. They're still figuring out issues around morality, what is right, what is wrong. And it becomes a crucial opportunity to influence them at a critical time of their lives. Because if we don't, as you suggest, we get that same student in high school, and we've lost some critical time to influence and have an impact in their lives.
Definitely.
Yeah. I had a chance in an event at New Mexico State University before this taping to hear a lot of reflection about these issues, and also first Senator Solz and then Head Administrator Casillas. I'd like you to address the fact that students need to have a passion in school, something that they may not become when they graduate, but that they think maybe this is a possibility, maybe this is a profession, or maybe this is something that I will do later in life. And this is another issue I know a lot of you talked about today, that standardized testing and other things are crowding out a lot of arts and culture and other classes and activities that might have had a bigger place in previous years? Senator Stoles, first.
And I think you're absolutely right. And developmental psychology tells us that particularly middle school, high school students have a real need to belong to something. And if we don't help provide some of that, they will belong to gangs, they'll belong to negative types of things. We know that students who are in the band, they graduate. Students who are in Mesa, they graduate. If they belong to something that they believe in, we've got a graduate on the way. If they feel that school is just where they go during the day and they don't feel like they belong, they don't feel like there's an administrator, there's an adult who cares that they came to school that day, if they don't feel like there's a reason for them to be there, they walk their way through high school and they might graduate, they might not, but they have the feeling nobody cares. And I know well my daughter, when she was a sophomore in high school, her grades were so-so. She was just kind of coasting through. When she got to be a junior, she got into the Excel program in the nursing and was assigned over at the hospital in the emergency room. Suddenly, she wanted to go to school every day. Her grades got better. I mean, she had a reason. She knew why she was taking different classes.
School
it mattered because now she had a purpose.
Yeah.
She had something she belonged in.
And I believe the passion that we talk about, kids are passionate. Like for me, I'm an education nerd. I love education, but did I like it when I was in middle school and high school? No. If you would have asked me, what are you going to do when you grow up? I really didn't know. I wanted to be an engineer because everybody wants to be an engineer. Everybody wants to go be a rocket scientist and build a spaceship. But I believe we got to really embrace and open the doors to students to investigate what their passion is. In at La Academia, for example, my school, we provide them with about 6-7 different electives, and the kids love going to school because they take 4 core classes, and then they get 3 classes where they go from music to dancing to robotics to drafting to ESL classes if they want to learn a different language to Spanish classes. And so they have more than a reason to go and do academics. The kids don't go to school to learn academics, although we know as adults that that's what they should be doing. Kids don't want to go in there for that. They want to go to find their passion. We have the kids that love music. And if it wasn't for music, I wouldn't have them at school every day. And we have the kids who love robotics, who love science. And if we didn't provide those special programs for them, we wouldn't have them at school every day. And I believe as educators, it is our responsibility to find what really moves students and what really embraces their passion so that we can attract them to be at school, so that we create these programs at school and we give them a reason to be at school, other than if you don't go to school, you're going to fail. And they don't understand what failure is. By that time, they haven't paid anything. My dad used to tell me when I said, I don't need to go to school, he'd say, okay, you move out of the house next week and start paying your rent, start paying your own laundry, do your own laundry, start paying your own bills. And then I would realize, well, I don't need school, but I need you to support me. And my dad would say, well, one day I'm not going to be around, so you need to be your own individual person who's going to support yourself. And if I didn't become responsible, my father said, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think that was good for me because my dad communicated that, but it wasn't the school's responsibility. And I think the schools too often were left with that responsibility when in reality we should be there opening doors and giving programs to kids so that they can find that passion and pursue it.
Yeah, another important theme that it's not just about schools and teachers, it's about parents, it's about communities, and we're going to continue to explore that. And throughout our program, we are featuring KRWG's American Graduate Champions. And we begin with a champion who was later named New Mexico Teacher of the Year, David Morales of Mayfield High School in Las Cruces. Let's take a look.
I tell people I'm a teacher, they kind of cringe a little bit and then when I tell them I'm a high school teacher, they're no, I could never do that, or no, they're scary. And they're great people, they're great kids. And going in with that attitude, you see that a lot of the kids respond to that and they want to give you their best. I currently teach New Mexico history as part of the social studies and history department, and I'm also the Enlace teacher. Enlace stands for Engaging Latino Communities for Education, and it's part of a statewide collaborative. 2 years ago, I wanted to leave. I was done. I was tired, I was angry with the political climate, with everything around teaching. And I got asked to read names at graduation. And I saw my kids walk across the stage. And that's it. After that, I told my wife they're gonna have to take me out kicking and screaming. I go, I'm gonna do the best I can. And last year I was lucky enough and blessed enough to win the Teacher of the Year. And it was a testament to my children, my kiddos, my students, and the teachers I work with, the administration I worked for. You know, I came back and I focused on them. And I figured if I do right by them, I'm gonna be okay. And now it's all about them.
So many great teachers in our community and in our state, and there is one of them, David Morales. But what really also hits you in that story is just a few years ago, he says he was ready to quit. Our teachers are facing enormous pressures in terms of standardized testing, how it's being used in evaluations, all sorts of policies that are bearing down on our teachers. And you know, Senator Soules, you're going to be featured in a KRWG documentary on education coming up. You talk about this from your perspective as a teacher. You yourself facing a confusing evaluation system, didn't make any sense, and the pressures of this testing regime that is going on in our classrooms today. Talk about that for me.
I'm very concerned about, excuse me, about how we're using tests in the classroom, because it's no longer about improving learning for the students. It's about evaluating students, it's about evaluating teachers, because the results don't come back in time to improve the learning. And therefore, I think we've lost the whole point or purpose for those tests. This last summer, and I think is what you were talking about, is after I retired, but I used my own evaluation from being a high school teacher when I was on the stand as part of the lawsuit dealing with the standardized tests, where my evaluation, was evaluated with some students who I never had in class, but they were part of my evaluation. And how can teachers feel like they're being evaluated fairly on their teaching when it's even on students that they never had? And I somewhat jokingly, it's like, well, maybe I should have just pulled kids out of the hallway and say, here, come here, let me help you with some math, because you might be one of the ones on my evaluation next year. And I think that just demoralizes teachers. Teachers teach because they care about their students. They truly care about their students. I've met Mr. Morales, I've been in his classroom, and man, you can't come out of there without feeling good, because the trust and the respect that he has for his students and vice versa is infectious. But when our system starts chasing away people like that, or make them consider whether they should stay in teaching, we've got a problem we need to deal with.
Yeah. Head Administrator Casillas, I want to ask you about this. You know, one of the things that when I was reflecting about this, because we've done a lot of reporting on this, and the effect of standardized testing. One of the things that I wondered about from an educator's perspective, who's in the thick of this every day in K-12 education, people say to me, this is not only a danger in the sense that we are attempting to standardize kids and what kids are doing. It's also a danger in terms of standardizing teachers as well. I think about this because I think about my own life growing up, and I had teachers who were really tough on me because they needed to be tough on me, and I learned so much from them, and I wouldn't be where I am today without them. But I also had teachers who had a soft touch, who I needed that in that particular class. I had this diversity, incredible diversity of instruction, and I'm worried. Are you worried?
I'm really concerned about it, actually, and you hit it. You say exactly what the problem is an educator is not only somebody who teaches you, it's somebody who embraces you when you need to be embraced. And unfortunately, now educators are being engaged on how much the kids progress, but they're not being engaged on the fact that some kids, some days you have kids that come in and you're an uncle that day, an uncle that understands this kid, and you talk to them about their problems. Some days you're grandma, and there are days where you're that disciplinarian that you say, no, you've had a chance, you need to get with it, you need to move along. And so we need to be difficult. with our kids, or not difficult, but we need to be firm with our kids at times. But there are times where we need to be very understanding. And unfortunately, the evaluation system, it doesn't allow teachers to be humans with the kids anymore. It's all about academics. It's all about putting your feelings away, because we have a test that's coming up, and the kids don't want to be told that. The kids want to be told, you know what, last night mom and dad had a fight and I can't think clearly today. I would like a teacher that can sit with me and talk to me and embrace me and my issues and tell me that everything is going to be okay, even if you know that it's not true. Because that's what we need as humans. We need to be embraced, and the evaluation system, it doesn't allow teachers to be that human. And it actually, if you look at the system, it's turning off teachers to education. I know David Morales very well myself. I went to high school with him. I'm a graduate of Mayfield, and I can tell you that I love Mr. Morales not only because of the work that he's done, but when we were growing up, him and I were those kids that we hoped we had a future. And we wanted to have a future. And if it wasn't, I have, Glenda Greenwood she was a high school teacher at Mayfield, and she was the hardest teacher I ever had. And I love that woman to death. I still keep in touch with her. She's somebody that's very special to me, because she didn't give me a chance when it was time for me to hand in an assignment. I had to hand it in. But when I needed somebody to talk to and somebody to embrace me and tell me everything's going to be okay, she was that teacher that did that. And with the evaluation system that we have in place now, she would have never had time to embrace me and say, Octavio, it's going to be okay. If you focus, if you keep pushing yourself, if you don't give up, you will succeed, because she knew I wanted to succeed. But the system that we have in place now, it doesn't allow teachers to become that understanding, compassionate person that you need to be in order to be able to reach kids. You got to reach kids emotionally first before you reach them academically. And that is the problem with the evaluation system.
I would even dare to say that the three of us would not be sitting here if there wasn't a teacher who not only paid attention to the academic side, but attempted to meet our personal and individual needs. So that's what I refer to as a holistic model. No one's saying that there shouldn't be testing. We need some kind of testing in which we gauge success in some areas and so forth. But the responsibility of a teacher today is really an holistic educator. The individual who can, as you suggest, is the mother sometime, is the father, is the disciplinarian, and what have you. And so if a teacher is forced to only spend his or her time in looking at, we've got to get through this material, I don't care how you're feeling today, but we've got it, this test is coming up and so forth, it doesn't allow that flexibility. And so I do agree that we have this overabundance of testing as a way of perhaps getting federal or state funds and all of those kinds of things that are important. This is the only profession that, in my view, is overregulated to some extent, and the cost is very high if we're not successful. And so part of it is that whether we end up being teachers, doctors, engineers, we've got to get it right at the front end because it has a long-term effect. And so I would argue that a model that might be more successful, again, to use the word holistic again, is that helping teachers, you do your testing, but you also do the psychological interventions, you do the holistic kinds of things, the emotional kinds of things that people as human beings need. We still need those as adults. Those are some of the things we expect from our partners and our wives and spouses. Why would we not think that these kids need those same kinds of things to motivate them? In that context, then, what emerges, I think, at least when I think in terms of my experience, and as I've heard from both of my colleagues, you begin to have this internal hunger in your stomach because you want to achieve, you want the approval of that teacher. You want them to support you. And so thinking of ways in which we can do that is perhaps critical in addition to the testing part of it, so that there is some balance between the expectations going forward.
And I would kind of comment, all of the testing, I think we've moved to where the tests have become what's important in education. Yeah. It's what we can test and what we can measure easily, and we've made that important rather than what's important and tried to deal with those. And I think the interactions between teachers and students is the most important thing, because I know in my students when I had math, and math is a tough one for high school kids. Most of them don't come in excited about mathematics. But when I can reach them emotionally, then they want to learn math because they don't want to let me down.
Yes.
And that's a powerful thing when that happens.
Yeah.
That's a very, very, actually I believe that's one of the most important, the most successful students that we have in the schools that I've worked at, and I've taught from first grade all the way to 10th grade in my career. The kids that I have been able to impact the most are the kids that at the end of the day, they left thinking Mr. Casillas really cares about me, and if I don't show up with that homework tomorrow, it's not so much that they didn't learn the lesson and that they understood that those skills were necessary for the lesson that follows, but they left with the mentality, I gotta do the homework because he cares so much, and I can't let down that one teacher that really loves me and cares for me. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Senator Solz, because I believe that is the most important thing we can do for our kids, is we can get away from assessments. We do need assessments because we do need to understand how it is that we're reaching our kids academically. But before assessments, we need to focus on the whole kid. And before we focus on their academic progress, we need to focus on who they are as a person. And I think it's very important that we reach them and that we make them feel like, you know, when I leave the school today, or when I get to school today, I'm going to go be with the group of teachers that really, really care about me, and I'm going to have my work done, not so much because I understand the skills are necessary, but because they work so hard for me, because kids respect adults until adults lose their respect for one reason or another.
Well, we are going to now see another wonderful teacher. Our next KRWG American Graduate Champion is piloting a program in Las Cruces that was developed by a New Mexico State University professor.
We learn differently. We learn by seeing, we learn by hearing, and we learn by moving, and that's a lot of the philosophy behind MILK. The MILK program started from a woman named Dr. Deborah Knapp. She's professor and director of dance at New Mexico State University, and she developed this MILK program, and MILK stands for Methods in Learning Kinesthetically. Those little fidgety kids in the back that are always moving or can't focus and can't sit still and they're all over the place, they're checking out. They're not able to learn as well as those auditory learners. Basically, we take our lessons that we teach for the day in our regular curriculum, and we put movements to everything. We teach the kids the alphabet in sign language, so they all know their ABCs with their hands. And then with those ABCs in their body, they'll take the sign and they learn their spelling words this way. And so when I give them a spelling word, they start to practice with their hands. We also take stories and we bring them to life by moving to them. This MILK program has given them the opportunity to be so confident that they just read and they remember everything. 90% of the class is getting there. There'll be times I'll click on a PBS myself and say, let me show you this video I saw that we watched, and I'll bring up the video and the kids will watch it, and then we get into our discussions that way.
A fantastic program there, and being piloted in Las Cruces. Dean, as I mentioned, this was developed at New Mexico State University by a professor, Deborah Knapp. Tell me about the importance, in your view, of developing new techniques like this in education, new ways to teach and engage young people.
Sure. Well, one of the examples you just showed us demonstrates some of that. It speaks to a matter we were talking about earlier. That is, there has been an historical and traditional assumption that there are primarily two ways that people learn. And one is verbally, and their ability to see. The third component that Dr. Knapp introduces in here is the movement, becoming active in their own education. I would figure to guess here that most of the students who we just saw think they're just having fun, that they're just playful, they're moving their body and what have you. You know, some of us learn by touch. You know, some of us learn by movement and so forth, and so it becomes part of developing what we've been talking about for most of this time, a holistic way to engage in learning. And so this is one of the new approaches that we're seeing modeled and demonstrated here in our community, where it's not just sitting behind a desk all day, even though there are times for that, but there are kids who learn different ways through movement, by doing. You know, I can remember growing up as a kid, there were kids, the teacher could talk about it all day, but if they drew a picture, they got it. And some of us have use different parts of our brain to engage in these activities. So this is an exciting opportunity for us to encourage and enhance and move to a holistic way of learning that engages all the senses, so that our students feel as though they are becoming better people as a result of this process.
Senator Soules, do you think this is an even bigger issue today? I know in my last job, when I had the opportunity to teach college classes every semester, and I did this for about 7 years, it seemed to me that as each year went on, the attention span was a little bit shorter. And I'll be honest, I can relate to this a little bit, because I know in our connected 24/7 world, where I'm online most of the working day, I think my attention span is a little bit smaller too. And so is that part of, do you think, a really important thing that we need to look at in education, that we need to find new ways to keep students' attention?
I actually don't think that we have shorter attention spans. I think we've got more competition for our attention.
Okay.
And that if things are not engaging in what's in front of a student, then what's on their cell phone becomes what's engaging. And so I think teachers very much have to have that passion for their subject.
Were you able to keep cell phones out in the classroom?
Actually, an interesting story where when I was very much trying not to, and I had set up with a student ahead of time, and one of my very good students, and she took her cell phone out, and I'd already told another student to put it away. I said, let me have it. And when she gave it to me, I took it over to my desk, I took out a hammer and smashed it.
Oh.
Class went deathly quiet, like, Soules has lost it. Yeah, he's lost it. Now, I'd set up, it was an old phone, I'd set up with her and stuff, but within half an hour, the whole school knew, it's like, whoa, don't take your phone out in Soules' class, because they weren't sure whether it was a setup or not.
Now there's the lesson.
But, well, and that's that visual type of thing. I mean, they all remember that instant when I actually
It's
hit
unforgettable.
the phone.
Yes.
You know, and so they've got that deeply embedded in their memory. But I don't think we have to compete with phones and computers and other things if we make sure that the lesson is engaging. And sometimes that means bring those in as part of the lesson. Right. My last couple of years teaching, my students were wonderful, because I'd go, it's like, oh, who was the psychologist that had the bell type? And one of the students is already back there Google. It was Pavlov, mister. and I started using that more, is have them look something up. Correct. Because rather than me telling them, when they looked it up, it's now in their brain two different places. First they had to look it up, and I was the one that found it, and they remember that. Yeah. And so trying to, instead of compete with those other things, which appears to be a shortened attention span, try and use that as a way of engaging the students. And I think it's a much better strategy.
Okay.
And I agree with Senator Soules. Obviously, you were a very good teacher. You knew how to keep your kids engaged. You knew how to deliver discipline. You know, smashing a phone that is discarded, that has been discarded. It's a good way for the kids to learn. But I agree with you. Not only do the kids, do we need to bring in their world into our classroom? Their world is going to be left behind by the technology that follows that, and if we don't help them keep up with their world, then they're going to be left behind. So we need to bring it in, and we need to find a way to bring this technology into the classroom, because we also learn from that. You know, I didn't know about Siri when my kids started using it at the school, and then I started hearing kids, hey Siri this, hey Siri that, and I kept thinking, who are they talking to? You know, who's Siri? And I got to learn from them, because I didn't reject that. As a language arts teacher, I had them bring it into the classroom, and I do agree that we have to invite the kid with everything that they are and they have into our classroom, so that they can feel welcomed and important, and in the most important aspect of the classroom. So I agree 100%. We need to find that it's not that they have shorter attention span, they just have better ways to apply it than we did in the past, where, you know, I can sit now and read a book for 4 or 5 hours, and when I was a kid I could read maybe for 15 minutes, because I had so many things that I'd rather be doing. And I think that's what what we need to do with the kids. It's what you did in your classroom, is find a way to bring their world into the classroom so that we can use it to their advantage.
So here is the lacuna, though, and it is this. I agree that we have to figure out ways to integrate the technology of the day in their experience. The problem is not every student has the technology.
Right.
So we have to figure out a way, if we're going to become part of their world, to recognize that not every family has the financial or economic resources for cell phones, iPads, tablets, and so forth. So we also need to, I know many schools have these computer labs and so forth that allow students to have access to that. So if we embrace that technology, which I think teachers are beginning to do, we have to figure out a way, particularly for our low-income students, where the choice between buying a cell phone and buying an iPad, or buying food or paying rent, is a pretty easy decision. So we have to figure out a way in which we can provide technology support so that these kids who are already further behind because of economic reasons don't become further and further behind.
Yeah.
And and again, the other part of that, and again, I beginning to sound like a broken record. The holistic issue here is, if I'm already coming in from what is perceived as a deficit model, and we can talk about why that's wrong, but if I'm already coming into a school system in this environment where I'm already poor and I don't have all the resources that I perceive my colleagues don't have, and I as a teacher start using technology, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that I don't have that, and I recognize the need, the way in which I can help me advance my career. We've got to have a teacher who is sensitive with these soft skills to say, hey Bill, hey Don, how can we help you enhance your educational experience? So I think that's the other side of the coin as we talk about the population that we hope to empower for future generations.
Yeah, and I think what we want to make sure we don't do is that the technology increases the affluence divide.
That's right.
And makes it worse when we think we're trying to make things better.
Yes.
And I want to talk about another financial issue as well. Head Administrator Casillas, for a KRWG documentary on education, we talk with New Mexico administrators who say that they are having a really hard time recruiting and retaining teachers. This should be no surprise given the vast disparity that we have in pay for starting teachers. You're aware of this. For example, the El Paso Independent School District pays about 25% more for a starting teacher compared to Las Cruces Public Schools. Thoughts on this?
Oh, it's a huge problem, and it really is, and it's a disadvantage to the students, and it's a huge disadvantage to the state. It's such a huge problem. Right now I'm in need of a social studies teacher, and I haven't been able to find one. Actually, it took me 3 years to find a science teacher, especially bilingual certified teachers. And it's such a huge problem because we don't attract anybody from out of state. I know a young lady, and I met her in Albuquerque about 6 months ago. And she moved from Texas into New Mexico because her husband had been relocated to this base out in Albuquerque. And she was thinking about, and I heard wonderful things about how she was just a great teacher, and I was congratulating her. And she tells me, I'm thinking about leaving education. And I would ask, baffled, why? Why would you? The impact that you have on the kids. And she says, my husband and I can't make a living here. She says, with me being a teacher, I can't make a living. I have other degrees that I can use, and I can make more money. And it was really sad to hear that she lost about $17,000 in relocating from Texas to New Mexico, and it's a huge problem. I was in Denver, or in Lafayette, Colorado, March 4th and 5th, and I was out there at a job fair trying to recruit a teacher for social studies out of New Mexico because I can't find one here, especially certified. And although I did interview a lot of people, none of them wanted to come to Albuquerque, to New Mexico. And they all know Albuquerque, but they don't all know Las Cruces, so they don't want to come to Albuquerque. And I say, no, I'm even further south in the heat. And then they say, you want me to go to your state? It's hotter over there than it is here. It's not a wonderful climate, of which I think it is actually, but the money was a huge huge problem for them. And I wasn't able to recruit a teacher even going out of state. And it's a huge problem for the state. And it's a problem we must address soon, because it also creates a competitive atmosphere so that teachers themselves force each other to become better educators, because there's somebody in line waiting to take their job if they don't make the ends meet. So it's a huge problem for our state.
Senator, you spent a lot of time in the public schools. Tell me about your feeling on this, the changes that you saw over the course of your career.
And very much I agree. We've got problems in that we have a fraction of the number of people going into the College of Education. I used to work in the advisement center and was faculty there, and it's probably 50% of what it was 10, 15 years ago. They aren't going into the College of Education. They're going into engineering. They're going other places that are going to pay them living wages and better salaries. And if we really believe that education matters, we need to make sure that we get the best and brightest to be our teachers, not going into other fields, and we have to be competitive. And we know currently someone coming out with a bachelor's degree in engineering starts at an average salary of about $55,000 to $60,000, or they can go into education, same person, and they start at 32, 34.
Yeah. Or 44 in El Paso.
Or 44 in El Paso, and I've heard they started in California for on the order of 50,000.
Yes.
And those states are getting our very best and brightest. And some people are connected here by culture and want to stay in their local community and are wonderful teachers and work very hard. But we've got over 300 openings in the state of New Mexico right now that we cannot fill. And particularly in the hard to fill areas of special education, bilingual education, TESOL, science areas, we can't attract people into those fields, and the main reason is because of pay. Several years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend who is one of those people, it's like, wow, you ought to be a teacher. You're so good around people and kids. If we can have kids around people like you. He's in engineering. And he said, if education paid as much as engineering does, I'd be a teacher in a heartbeat. But it doesn't. And therefore, we don't get to have our kids around really bright, energetic people that we all want our kids around.
Absolutely, yeah.
If I may, again, I agree with what my colleagues have said. One way we can begin to think about how do we address this, and as you know, pay inequity for teachers is not unique just to New Mexico. It's a national issue in many ways. One of the challenges, apart from figuring out a strategy about how you increase the salaries, are the incentives we can provide. And a number of states are starting to look at those kinds of things. One thing that I think would have a tremendous impact is a number of communities are developing debt release for students who are in teacher education. So we know you're not going to get that huge salary, but would you prefer to have more salary with the same amount of debt, or would you prefer to have less debt in getting your degree? So if we can agree, so I know I'm getting here into the weeds,
and, and certainly this has been used successfully in
other places.
So
it begs the question, why don't we develop a more robust activity that allows for debt relief for people who are going into teacher education, and at least get them to be committed to this profession for a period of years. And you have those kinds of approaches that I think we can explore. This isn't to suggest that some of these aren't being done, but I don't think the robustness of these activities need to be relooked at as we move forward in trying to retain teachers. If I may, one other point is that when I've talked to some of these recruiters who come to our college every year, I'm often amazed at what our sister states can offer, from bonuses for signing in to we don't really care whether you have your license or not or certification. We'll take you and we'll train you and those kinds of things. And so, as both of my colleagues have said, if we believe that education is important, then we may have to make some very tough decisions about other things that people think is important and recognize that not to do that will continue to have this long-term negative effect on the future of our state.
Absolutely. Well, prior to the taping of this program, New Mexico State University held a Grad Nation event. It is a national effort designed to increase America's graduation rate to 90% by 2020. A common theme at Grad Nation events involves the need for our community involvement, our community to engage students. And that brings us to our final American Graduate Champion. Take a look.
I was able to do the community gardens through my work as the Stan Fulton Endowed Chair. I was working with 4 different elementary schools here in Las Cruces. I worked with the principals to talk about the garden project and then went to the schools in which each of the 4 school students made presentations to me about what they wanted to see their school garden look like. It helped encourage science skills, technology skills through their presentation, math skills because they measured out the different dimensions of the gardens. They did some cost analysis of how much the flowers or plants would cost. And to have elementary students that excited about sort of applied research or action research is outstanding. I was a 7th and 8th grade teacher in the South Bronx in New York City, a few blocks away from Yankee Stadium. So worked with students from all different cultures, languages, and backgrounds, and I absolutely loved it. Growing up, I was a PBS kid. I was able to watch Sesame Street. To this day, it's still vital and important that there's free access to education and information for kids and their families. And I think PBS does that better than most. As sort of corny as it might sound, when people ask what is your purpose in this world or this life, mine is to help and to make the lives better for disenfranchised and underserved youth.
Reaching out to the community there in that community garden project, another one of our American Graduate Champions, New Mexico State University professor, Dr. Azadeh Osanlu. And I should mention, she was one of my teachers when I was a student at New Mexico State University in the doctoral program at New Mexico State University in educational administration. So I had a chance to learn from her, and what an experience and what a program. And this really then is a question for all of you, all 3 of you. This movement that is now beginning in Las Cruces, that is also happening in other cities around the country, to foster community support for public schools, whether that be the university, as the example that we just saw there, or nonprofit organizations. KRWG as an example. We have interns from our local high schools in the Excel program at Las Cruces Public Schools. There are so many examples of cities that have actually reported success with what are called community schools, supported by a real network of community groups. What do you make of this idea? And then the second part of this question is, what do you believe are the key areas that must be targeted? Senator, why don't we begin with you?
I'd be happy to. Community schools is not a new idea. I mean, there have been community schools back into the 60s and 70s where all of the services, they call them wraparound services, are provided there. And the school is the center of the community. And in many of our small communities around New Mexico, that still is the case. The school is the hub of the community. And some of the small communities are very afraid that they're going to get consolidated into other districts and lose their local school because it's so important to that community. In places like Las Cruces, which is a larger city, I think too often the schools are where we send our kids during the day, and they aren't the center of the community. And I think the whole effort is to try and get that back as the hub of the local community, a smaller, not Las Cruces, but smaller community where libraries are kept open till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Why do we close the libraries at 4 o'clock? Those ought to be open for the entire community, where there's health services brought in, when there's after-school programs, where there's summer sports programs. The athletic fields ought to be full of kids all through the afternoon, and really start trying to get the community back involved in their schools. That's good for the community, and it's good for the schools.
Dean, give me an idea in terms of your support in the College of Education, and then your belief in terms of all disciplines about the importance of this. We know that in universities, we spend a lot of time on research and teaching. This is service, but it also is, it's learning. It's also, in a way, probably research as well to see how a program like this might work.
So I think one of the pieces here is that colleges of education, and I dare say universities in general, need to think of what I would call a 180-degree model, which is you're in the classroom, you're doing this research, you need to develop a partnership with the community and test those hypotheses in the community, then be informed by what you experience in the community, and then bring it back into the classroom. Many universities simply do one part of that. They go into the community, they do the research, they say thank you for your engagement, and then they walk away. And not closing that loop that I think is very important is bringing the community back into the classroom and say, what have we learned? What can we do better? And then you keep this cycle going, because with every different cohort of parents and kids, the expectations and outcomes change. It's part of the human growth and the human predicament. And so that keeps what we do in the classroom fresh and alive and consistent with what's happening in the world. And I think we as faculty and administrators cannot be afraid to be informed by what we see in the community. Whether I have a PhD or a BA or an MA, that simply doesn't mean that I know everything about everything. And so that community engagement piece, I think our college in particular has a long history of community engagement. It is not new, as you've been told. And so what we need to do, though, is to step it up. Because we recognize in this environment, the environment we find ourselves in, that the engagement of the community, parents, grandparents, siblings, is a key component to this holistic solution. And more importantly, it helps the faculty in the classroom to become more and more culturally competent.
Head Administrator Casillas, take us home. We got about a minute.
You know, I believe schools should be doing that in itself. We don't have to be a community school to get the community engaged. And not only are we supposed to listen to them, it's a responsibility we have. Our schools should reflect our communities, and we better serve our communities when our community goes into the school and kind of help us structure the programs that they need. I believe charter schools are at an advantage in doing this, and I believe the autonomy that we have, and we're not a total sovereignty, but we do have some autonomy to the programs and that we implement at our school. And I believe we do that very well at our school. We provide parents with programs from computer skills to counseling. We are able to provide kids with an after-school program at La Academia. We even have Saturday school. We have a Saturday school. We've had it for 3 years now. And I believe our community responds very well to our school, not because we're doing something that hasn't been done before, but because we're doing something that has been done before that really did work. And I believe, I believe the people from the community feel that they are embraced and that they feel important just like their kids do at school. And they want to come to the school just like their kids want to come to the school, because they see the school making every effort possible to make them part of the educational program that serves their kids, because parents have dreams and visions for their kids, and when the school works to fulfill those dreams, the parents are all yours, and they will do whatever you ask of them, and they will be at the school, whether it's Friday or Monday or Saturday. They will be with the school collaborating because they know that we are there for the kid, and that is the most important component.
Well, thank you all for being there for our young people and for being with us on this panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for Issues and Answers, the graduation rate. KRWG will be airing many more specials on public education in the months ahead. Email your comments anytime to feedback@nmsu.edu. And to support in-depth local journalism, become a member or renew your membership anytime at krwg.org. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.